Yo, what's up, Broncos country? This is Eddie with Rocky Mountain Blitz. So today was the big day. Today was the day that every single team had to cut their roster down to 53. And, the Broncos, after the final preseason game where we dominated the Cardinals, which was awesome to watch, granted, it's still just preseason, the Broncos had a lot of really, really tough decisions to make today in order to shave the roster down to 53 players. Now, I'm going to go over, first, the players that made the roster on offense, defense, and then, of course, the special teams. There's only three of them on the special teams. And then I'm going to go through all the players that were actually either waived or released fully by the Broncos and just go over what my initial thoughts were to everything. So here we go. So on the offensive side of the ball, they did with the initial 53, they did keep all three quarterbacks, of course, Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, Jared Stidham, which was cool. I mean, that could change before the start of the season. If a team comes out and says, hey, we'll give you a whatever pick for, Zach or Jared, whichever, you know, they can move on. But my initial reaction, I didn't think they were going to carry 53 on the initial 53 roster or three quarterbacks on the initial 53 roster. I was wrong. But once again, that can still change. Um, Now the running back room, here's where it gets really, really, interesting. It starts getting interesting, I should say. They kept four running backs, one of which I didn't think they'd keep. I thought they would have kept, Beatty, honestly, because he seemed to have a solid, preseason. But the four running backs they kept, of course, were Javante, Estime, McLaughlin, and Watson on the initial 53 man roster. Those are four running backs that they kept. Now, um, receivers, they only kept five. I think they're probably going to bring more on. They'll probably bring another one on before the start of the season at some point. But the initial wide receivers they kept on this roster were Cortland Sutton, Josh Reynolds, Troy Franklin, Marvin Mims, and Vele, which everybody knew Vele was going to make it. He had an outstanding camp. He had an outstanding preseason. I would have been shocked if Vele didn't make this roster, in all honesty. Um, the one that kind of, well, like I said, we'll get into the guys that were cut. The tight ends that made the roster were, of course, Dulcich, Troutman, Lucas Kroll, and Nate Atkins. Now, I am going to touch on this subject. Nate Atkins, I think, I could be wrong. They might still bring Michael Burton back because they did, release Michael Burton today. But if they don't bring him back, I think Nate Atkins will be the fullback. He'll take over that role in this offense. So we'll have to wait and see on that one. Offensive line, so far they've kept nine offensive linemen. Of course, you got your original, starters, the five starters. You got Wattenberg, McGlinchey, Bowles, Powers, and Quinn Miners. And then the backups are Petrie, Crum, Pocheski, and Forsyth are the backups on the roster. So they got nine on the roster right now. That could change at any given time because looking at it from here, like really only one of those guys that's a backup on the offensive line is like a center slash guard, and that's Forsyth. Like Crum, Pacheski, Petrie, they're all, tackles. Like I don't think they're going to carry three tackles as backups. They're probably going to, eventually release one of those tackles and bring in another, guard or center, to have at least a second guy on the interior of that offensive line. Because if, you know, like Miners, Powers, or Wattenberg go down, or two of them go down, God forbid, Forsyth ain't going to be the only one on the roster for the interior offensive line. Now, moving on to the defense. I'm going to start on the defensive line, then go to linebackers and corners and then safeties. The defensive line, they kept six defensive linemen. Of course, you got the original three. You got Allen, you got John Franklin Myers, and DJ Jones. They kept Jordan Jackson, who was really good in the last preseason game. He had 2 sacks, I believe. Malcolm Roach, of course. He was a big acquisition that we got this offseason that really, really helped stop the run, which is something we've been really struggling with here in Denver for years. And then Awazarike, the guy that came back from a suspension from gambling last year. I think he had like a year suspension. He came back, and I guess he really impressed the coaches in training camp and in the preseason games. So those are your 6 defensive linemen. Interior or I'm sorry, inside linebackers. They kept four, of course, which I kind of figured they would. Justin Stranad, Alex Singleton, Cody Barton, and Bailey, the guy that had the 94-yard pick six in Sunday's game against the Cardinals. Like from all the reports I heard, they didn't just keep him on the roster because of that pick six he had on Sunday, but apparently he was having a good training camp. He had a good couple of preseason games. So I'm happy with that. That kid was a stud in that game. He was all over the field. Same with Stranad. He had that one really big hit inside the 5-yard line that forced a fumble, and we were able to scoop it up. So I'm happy those two young guys made it. Now, going to outside linebacker, they only kept four this year. I think last year they kept five. This year they kept four, and it's the obvious ones, Baron Browning, Jonathan Cooper, Nick Benito, and Jonah Ellis, the kid we drafted this year, I think in the 4th or 5th round. So that's exciting. I can't wait to see what Ellis, like, to me personally, Ellis and Benito were better than Cooper and Browning. Like Benito and Ellis together, that tandem, I think is going to be really, really, really freaking good this year. And I'm excited to watch him play. Now, moving on to corners, they kept 6 corners on the initial depth chart for the 53-man roster. Of course, Surtain, Riley Moss, he's pretty much won the second, cornerback position. He will be your second string corner out, opposite of Patrick Surtain. You got McMillan, the nickel corner, the slot corner. We all knew that was going to happen. And then the other ones they kept were Abrams Drain, the rookie that we drafted out of Missouri this year, Levi Wallace, who we signed in the offseason, and then, Smith, the young corner that we've had that I think mostly they got him for like a returner, special teams, which is nice. He's solid. And then they kept 5 safeties, surprisingly. I thought they would only keep 4 on the initial, 53-man roster, but they kept 5. And the last one, PJ Locke, Brandon Jones, those are going to be your starting safeties right there. But honestly, and I do have to say that Skinner, I kind of figured he'd make it. He had a solid camp, solid preseason. Same with Smith. He had a couple of, I think he had a pick in every single preseason game this year. He was all over the field. He was really, really good. And also the last one they kept was Devontae Key. Now he had a solid training camp. He had a solid couple of preseason games. But I think eventually once we start get closer to the season, they're probably only going to carry 4 safeties. I don't see them carrying 5 fully. Now, on special teams, of course, you got the long snapping, Fairbairn. I'm sorry, not Fairbairn. I forgot what his name is, but you got the long snapper that we've had for years. You got Will Lutz and Riley Dixon, because Riley Dixon, of course, won the punting competition. So those are all the guys that made the initial 53-man roster. And I'm fine with it. I mean, there was a couple shocks in there. I mean, yesterday, whenever they announced they were going to get rid or try to trade Tim Patrick, I really wasn't too shocked. I kind of seen this coming only because of his injury history. And I think Sean Payton at receiver, he wants to get younger. I think now in that wide receiver room, I think the oldest one is either Cortland Sutton or Josh Reynolds. You got Vele. Yeah, he's a rookie. He's 26, though. Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, they're a lot younger. So I think Peyton's just trying to go younger through this entire roster, So Tim Patrick, I hate seeing him go. He's a good player. And I don't know if you guys saw, but he did sign with the Lions like about a couple hours after the Broncos cut him. He did go sign with the Detroit Lions. So wish him all the best of luck. Now it's time to get into the players that were cut. And all the players that were cut or waived, today and yesterday, whenever the Broncos had to shave down the roster. So I think they got these in order from, who was cut or waived, first, all the way down to the last person. So here we go. The first one that was cut was Art Green, cornerback. He was actually not cut. He was waived, which is a big possibility. He can come back and be on the practice squad. That's a possibility. I mean, this one I really wasn't too shocked on. I mean, I don't think anybody was really shocked on Art Green getting cut. He had a solid couple of, I think he had one solid game in the preseason. So, and he had a good training camp, but I wasn't too shocked about that. The next one was Trenton Gill, the punter that we brought in to compete with Riley Dixon. He was also waived. Um, so they might bring him back on the practice squad. I doubt it. I don't think they're going to keep a punter on the practice squad. I mean, it happens, but I just don't see the Broncos doing it. I think you got 17 spots on the practice squad, so I think they're going to use that for something else. The first release that we had was Philip Dorsett. That means he's released. That means he can go anywhere and sign now. Like he's strictly a free agent. He can go out and sign wherever the heck he wants to. Next one that was waived. A lot of these guys were waived. They weren't released or cut outright. They were waived. The next one was Caleb Haynes, cornerback. He was waived. Didn't really see him too much. I mean, I know he played in the preseason. I know he was in training camp, but you haven't really heard his name too much. Sometimes people think that's good, but if you don't at least see like at least one good play or hear something about at least one good play he did, usually they're not doing too well, in my opinion, in practice and preseason. So he got waived. Alec Mock, I think he was from Air Force. He got waived. Of course, they got a lot of depth at the inside linebacker position. And, I think Bailey, they were only going to keep 4 originally. You already had 2 of the 4 in Singleton and Barton. So, and then, Strenat was pretty much a lock because he's a great special teamer. So, then offensive lineman Jarvis, he was waived today, which I didn't really hear much about him during the preseason and training camp. Didn't hear really anything about him mauling people over or playing that great. Another linebacker, Andre Smith, he was released, so he's able to go out and actually sign with another team if he wants to. Blackson, the D tackle that we released, he had a couple of good plays in the preseason. Not gonna lie, watching him, he looked pretty good, but he was released. That means he can go out and sign whoever he wants. I'm sure somebody's gonna pick him up. Safety Omar Brown was waived. I think he's a candidate to come back on the practice squad. Honestly, he had a solid camp. Like, I mean, I seen he had a couple of decent plays in the preseason, but he had a really, really solid camp. So I think they bring him back. Jalen Virgil, waived. He'll probably be back on the practice squad. He was a great special teamer. I think they'll probably keep him on the practice squad, and call him up if they need him for whatever reason. Someone gets hurt or, gets released, whatever, throughout the season. This one, I don't think anybody was really shocked on. Tyler Beatty, running back, was also waived. With the running back room being so, deep, I mean, they did keep, like I said, they kept 4 on the initial 53-man roster with Watson making that 4th spot. We knew, and honestly, I don't see them carrying 4 running backs all season. You knew Javonte Williams and McLaughlin were going to make the roster. Estime, he had a couple of, drop balls. He had that one really bad, ball that got ripped out of his hands in the first preseason game and returned back for a touchdown. And he doesn't really have a whole lot of burst, but I think come wintertime, I don't think the burst is really all that necessary. Whenever teams are, it's cold outside and teams really just don't want to tackle you, they're just going to come up and be like, nah, we're good. But the burst didn't really concern me other than him, I wish he was more like Williams was whenever Williams first came into the league. Like a guy, would try to tackle him and he would just carry the guy for like an additional 4 or 5 yards. Estime, I think, needs to work on that. Like he's that big bruiser running back. He needs to be able to do stuff like that. So hopefully that turns around. The next set of cuts that I have on my list here is tight end Thomas Yasmin. He was waived, which that shouldn't really shock anybody. We knew Dulcich after him coming back and him looking great in practice and in the preseason. We knew Dulcich was going to make this. We knew Troutman was going to make this roster. Lucas Kroll, we heard Sean Payton talk about him earlier in this offseason, how everybody's going to know his name by the end of the season. And then Nate Atkins, he's a solid, tight end that can catch, he can block. So I wasn't really too worried about this one. I don't think anybody was really shocked about Yasmin getting waived. This one did kind of shock me a little bit, only because I did watch him and I seen he had a couple of solid plays in the preseason, and that's Tillman, the edge linebacker. He was waived, which they're probably going to bring him back on the practice squad. But honestly, I'm really surprised he didn't make the initial 53-man roster. He was really good, man. Like, I remember watching him on the edge. He was constantly in the backfield. Now, yes, people say he was going against second and third stringers. Well, he himself was a second, third stringer. So he can only go up against what he was, allowed to, and he made the most of it. I'm surprised he didn't make this roster. Now, he was waived, so he's probably going to come back on the practice squad at some point. I wouldn't, be shocked if that were to happen. The next one, Hunter Kipmoyer, tight end. He was waived. Once again, tight end room was just stock full of freaking talent. And I really didn't see this kid. I mean, he had a couple of solid plays in the preseason, but, some guys make it, some guys don't. The next one, another one that kind of shocked me was Incoom. He also had a solid couple of preseason games, man. He was constantly in the backfield. He was waived. So they might bring him back, to the practice squad also. Matt Henningsen, he was waived. To be honest, I really didn't see much of him in the I mean, I did see him in the preseason. I didn't really hear much about him, him doing stuff. Like I said, Jordan Jackson had those 2 sacks on Sunday against the Cardinals. Wazirike, I think they want to keep him on the roster because I see some untapped potential there. So, this one, it was kind of like, okay, I can understand. But he's probably going to get brought back onto the practice squad. This one, to me, actually did kind of shock me a little bit because I thought he had a solid camp and solid preseason because he's been flying all over the field, and that's inside linebacker Jonas Griffith. I really thought that kid was going to make this roster. Yes, I understand with the Bailey situation, Stranad, great special teams, Singleton, Burton, but I guess they just figured, they want to go younger. They want to go somebody that's not. I think Jonas Griffith has been injured like last year. They want a younger guy that hasn't been injured, and I can understand why Griffith got waived, so they could probably bring him back on the practice squad. But I honestly see him getting picked up by another team because he's all over the place on the field. Like he's good over the middle of the field. Michael Bandy, another one that was waived, had a solid camp. I mean, he had a couple decent catches in the preseason, but with all the roster talent we had on this freaking team, you know, honestly, I didn't see him making it, period. Like with all the young and people they have on the roster that are a lot better receivers, I didn't see Bandy making it. Mustipher waived. Not really too shocked by this one, honestly. He was brought in this offseason. He didn't really do too much. Like he mostly came in, I think, to be the starting center initially. But once Luke Wattenberg pretty much just took that job and ran with it, like Mustipher stood no chance. I think that was pretty much his, death wish or the death of him right there. That was going to get him off the roster right there. The fact that Luke Wattenberg, was able to come in, take that center position and run with it. If Wattenberg wasn't able to do that, then Mustipher probably would be your starting center. Will Sherman, waived. Not too surprised about this one either. But the depth of interior offensive linemen they cut, like I said, the only one they got on the roster right now is Alex Forsyth for guard or center. I believe probably maybe Mustipher comes back, Sherman comes back. Maybe even the rookie Nick, I can't say his name, Gargulo or whatever, the rookie that we drafted in the 7th round this year. I have a feeling one of those guys are going to come back. Because they need another interior offensive lineman. They can't just rely on Forsyth for 2 guards in the center position all year in case one of those guys go down. Like I said, they got 3 tackles on the roster right now. Unless they think one of those guys can actually play at guard or center, which I don't know, maybe they do. But I feel like one of those guys, if not somebody else on the roster, is going to get cut, and they're going to bring one of these guys back. They were all waived, all these interior offensive linemen, so they could very easily go on the practice squad, and maybe the Broncos call them back up before week 1. We'll have to wait and see on that. Jacobs, offensive tackle, who was waived. A lot of people were actually shocked about this one because he had a really, really good preseason. The guy, I don't think he allowed a single sack in the preseason, honestly. If I remember right, looking at the stats, he didn't allow a single sack. So I'm surprised he actually got waived. But once again, he got waived. They're probably going to bring him back on the practice squad or try to. But honestly, I don't think he's going to clear waivers. I think somebody else is going to pick him up, to have a backup tackle. Calvin Throckmorton, he was released, so I don't see him coming back. Some other team's probably going to sign him. Didn't really hear much on him. Didn't really see much out of him. So, I mean, he can go. Safety, let's see. Tanner McAllister, he was waived. Once again, they got 5 safeties on the roster. Maybe he comes back and he's on the practice squad, but I don't see him. Any safety that gets cut, I don't see them coming back because they got 5. And honestly, I think they're going to only carry 4 this year. And one of the guys on the roster, probably either, I would say most likely, Key, is probably going to wind up getting put on the practice squad too at some point, and they're only going to carry 4 on the active roster throughout the season. Next one, this one, I don't think anybody really was shocked, was Newsome, the cornerback. He was waived. I think he's definitely going to be back on the practice squad. He had a solid camp, solid couple of games in the preseason. So I think he will be back on the practice squad. Like, that's a guy. Hopefully he clears waivers because he actually was pretty good. So a team might scoop him up. Who knows? D tackle Elijah Garcia waived. All honesty, I don't think he's not going to be on the roster at any point. He might be on the practice squad. He was solid last year in the preseason. Didn't really see much out of him this preseason, so we'll just have to wait and see on that one. And let's see here. I got a couple more. Michael Burton was full on released. Now, there's a lot of skepticism saying, they're probably going to cut him. I've been hearing a lot of people over the last couple hours, they cut Michael Burton. They're probably going to bring him back in a couple of days once they get everything situated on the roster. I don't think so. I think fullback's a dying breed in the NFL, and Nate Atkins, they let him play a few snaps at fullback, this preseason, and he actually played well. So I think they're probably just going to keep Nate Atkins at fullback and not even bother bringing Michael Burton back. Jordan Miller, nose tackle, he was waived. Honestly, I didn't really see anything about this guy during preseason or training camp that made me go, wow. So I don't think he's coming back. Little Jordan Humphrey, this one was big. A lot of people thought he was going to make the roster. I remember seeing an hour before the deadline today that, they cut, so a lot of these, fourth, fifth, sixth string receivers. Jordan Humphrey's going to make it. Jordan Humphrey's going to make it. And right as the freaking time was getting ready to expire today, they didn't waive, they released little Jordan Humphrey. I think he's 100% gone. He's probably going to go sign somewhere else. Perine, once again, this one really shouldn't have shocked anybody. When we drafted Estime, you had McLaughlin, who was a stud last year and he's younger, he's faster, he's cheaper. He was pretty much, Perine was our third down receiving back out of the backfield. Yes, I'm not going to say Perine was bad last year, but McLaughlin was better. He was younger, faster, and he's a lot cheaper. So anybody saw this move coming. You saw this move coming 3 months ago, especially after they drafted Audric Estime. A lot of people were even saying, Williams could be gone, which I was like, that's not going to happen. And the last one, and by the way, Perine was released. They were talking about maybe trading him. I guess they couldn't find a trade partner for him. So they just, outright cut him today. And the last one, which this one, like I said, it didn't really shock me too much just because of his age and his injury history over the last 2 years, but it did shock a lot of people, and that's Tim Patrick. With his injury, in 2022, he had the season-ending injury with the ACL. Last year, he had the Achilles tear. He's 30 years old. I think he'll be 31 by the end of the year. As much as I hate seeing him go, I kind of figured this was probably going to happen. They asked him to take a pay cut last year. Not because that was the reason why they're going to come. It was mostly because of the injury. But, I mean, with them drafting Vele and the emergence of Vele this year, it was all but clear that Tim Patrick was probably going to be off this roster. Because, honestly, I don't see the Broncos carrying 4 big body wide receivers, 50-50 guys. Because you got that in Sutton, you got that in Reynolds, you got that in Vele. Patrick was the same kind of receiver. I don't see them carrying that. And then you had your 2 playmaker / speed guys and Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin. So I wasn't too surprised, but a lot of people were really surprised about the fact that, Tim Patrick was actually released. He wasn't waived or anything. He was released. But take solace in knowing this, that a couple hours after Tim Patrick got released from the Broncos, the Lions automatically picked him up. He's going to go to Detroit, and that's good. He'll be able to continue his career for a few more years. And I hope he has a great year this year with Detroit. I really do. So, but that was the Broncos' initial 53-man roster. All the players that made the roster initially, all the players that were cut / waived. Surprisingly, none were traded. I heard there was a rumor going around today. Damari Mathis was put on the PUP list, because he hurt his ankle in that last preseason game. But I've heard that a lot of teams are calling the Broncos, for Damari Mathis. Like teams want to trade for Damari Mathis. Now, do the Broncos trade him? Like once he gets off the PUP list and he comes back in, he's healthy and he can play. Will the Broncos trade him? It's a possibility. Like it depends. Like honestly, as bad as he was at the beginning of the year last year, I mean, this year he had an okay couple of preseason games, but he was mostly running with like the 3s and 4s. So if you can get like a 5th round pick out of him, I take it. Honestly, if I was the Broncos, yeah, I understand he's young, but he's not really all that great. And if someone's willing to offer you a 5th round pick, I mean, no one was willing to offer a 7th, a 6th, or a 5th for Tim Patrick or Samaje Perine. But if you can get a 5th out of freaking, Damari Mathis, I take it in a heartbeat. So, but that's, like I said, the initial 53-man roster, all the players cut, all the players that made it. Like I said, these players that made the roster, players that got cut / waived, maybe some of them come back. Maybe the guys that made the initial 53 are not on the 53 come week 1. Maybe some of the guys that got cut / waived, maybe they do. Maybe they are on the roster come week 1. We'll just have to wait and see. Maybe the Broncos go out and I also heard a rumor that the Broncos might go out and get an interior offensive lineman in free agency. Might go through the waiver wire, check and see what they got. And might pick someone up through the waiver wire. I think the Broncos on the waiver wire this year, they're 12th. So they'll probably pick an interior offensive lineman up somewhere in there. Maybe, I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. What was your initial reaction to the 53-man roster? The people that were cut, people that were waived. What do you think about the roster? Like, was anything surprising to you? Any other players that were surprise cut candidates that you didn't see coming? People that made the roster you didn't see coming? Let me know in the comments below, please. So please like, comment, subscribe on this video, and I will talk to you guys later. Peace.